time I've ever given this talk, and I'm so thankful for the folks at the travel show to grapple with this very important issue. Travel in a warming climate, right? It's the white elephant in this room. And thanks to my partner, Craig, the COO of my business, he's been the driving force behind this initiative of ours for 5 years or something. We've decided we want to set a standard, to set an example for other tour organizers and travel writers and publishers that we can travel, but we can travel in a way that maximizes the good about travel and minimizes the bad about travel. Some people would just be flight shamed out of their travels. I don't think that's the solution, because we need to get to know the world. We're 4% of this planet. There's 96% out there. The worst thing we can do for the climate and everything else is for Americans to stop traveling. That would be bad news for this planet, because the world needs us and we need to get to know the world, and we do that most intimately and effectively by traveling, and we need to travel in a way that is ethical and responsible. So what we're going to do today is dedicate about an hour of your time, and we're going to talk about why we travel, what is the value of travel, what are the various ethical issues of travel, and then how can we travel in a way where, as I mentioned, we get more out of our travels to make us better global citizens, and we contribute less to climate change. So it's just, again, it's quite admirable that the travel show slots this in, and I think there's a growing demand for it by thoughtful public and consumers. So in today's presentation, first of all, if you're here for practical skills about, budget travel and everything, you missed that talk. That was this morning, all right? I'm doing it again tomorrow morning. If you want, on my website at ricksteves.com, you can see versions of that. Also, we've got our booth right over there, about 50 steps, and there you can get our newsletter, and you can get our calendar. We've got a fun calendar full of beautiful photographs for this year and so on, and talk to our staff about what we're doing with our company. But right now, I want to focus on this issue. So for the first half hour, I'm going to be talking about the value of travel. We asked our public for what are the ethical issues that they think we should be dealing with, and I'll review a lot of different ethical issues, not with solutions, but as conversation starters. And then the major issue, kind of obviously, is climate change. And we'll talk about concrete examples of how we can see climate change in our travels in Europe and what Europeans are doing to fight it. And then ideas on how we as travelers can mitigate the carbon that we put into the environment. So after I sort of lay the groundwork, I'll introduce Craig, and he will have the last half of the hour talking specifically about our program. So when we think about travel, my business, I employ 100 people. It's my passion. My life's work is to write guidebooks so people can travel. And I've written a lot of books, and about 1 million people, 1 million of these books sell every year. That's a lot of people traveling, and that's a lot of carbon. Also, we do tours. On a good year, we take 30,000 people to Europe. All of them contribute carbon to the environment. 40 different itineraries. I go to shows like this and try to talk people into taking our tours. And I've got 150 wonderful guides that would like to do their work knowing that we are carbon neutral. Now, I don't want to, and the other reason I'm here is because 3 months ago, I got a grandson, my first grandson, and his name is Atlas. And I don't know about, I do know about you guys. We all want our grandkids to be able to do travels just like we are. And we're on a trajectory now where they will not be able to, if we're honest with ourselves. But we live in a world where we don't assess costs in a long-term, honest way. Our accounting is designed to look at it in a short-term way. The quarterly profit statement is the worst thing possible when it comes to your profit in the next generation. So it's a very, very big challenge for us to see beyond that. That is for sure. So I'm here with Atlas and our grandchildren in mind also. When I think of how my daughter loves her son, look at the love there. Now there's a privileged young lady with a very lucky little son. I've traveled enough to know that this world is home to 7 billion people, and every one of those children is just as precious and deserving and valuable. And every one of those parents loves their kids as much as we love ours. There's no difference. If you believe in a God, we are children of God. We're all brothers and sisters. There's no proximity to suffering. If it's on this planet, it's real. That's what you get when you travel thoughtfully, that very fundamental understanding. That's why I'm so committed to inspiring Americans to venture beyond Orlando, which happens to be our mission at Rick Steves Europe. Nothing against Orlando, but after 3 or 4 trips there, go across the seas and see what the other 96% of humanity are doing. So that's sort of the basis of this. How can we do our business? Equipping people with that information, writing all those books, taking all those tours, and be ethical. Now, I don't want to brag about this. This is just a baseline ethics. We should pay for the carbon our flight produces, period. It's pretty straightforward. You can stop that carbon by not flying, or you can do what's called mitigation. Mitigation is real. It's not a cop-out. It's investing in something that creates enough good to mitigate the bad you create. If you create this much carbon, and if you create that much that will take care of that carbon in an honest, scientific way, you are going carbon neutral. And I'm no scientist, but I've read enough studies to know that the general consensus is that if you smartly invest $30 per person flying from Europe, the United States to Europe and back, if you invest that smartly, you can mitigate the carbon you create. I wish our government taxed us for it. I wish the airlines charged us for it and it was part of their cost of doing business, but they don't. So it's an ethical traveler that will find a way to pay that $30. As a tour company, we figure how many people do we take to Europe? 30,000, multiply that by 30, that's 900,000, round it up to $1 million, invest that $1 million in carbon mitigation, and then our travelers get the peace of mind of knowing they're traveling carbon neutral, and as a company, we feel more ethical. Does that make sense? Now, the conventional way to do that for a first world company is to invest in carbon offsets. More first world companies that do good stuff. That's fine, but we're a little more creative. We have a global point of view. We're travelers. We would rather accomplish the same mitigation by empowering farmers in the developing world to do their work in a way that contributes less to climate change. Half of the people on this planet, I understand, are smallholder family farmers living in a part of the world where the average income is $5 per day. They're struggling to make ends meet, to feed their kids, and they contribute mightily to climate change, just like we do, even though they're very poor. If we can help them do their work more productively and smarter from a climate agriculture point of view, they produce more, they have more to sell, they have more nutrition for their families, and they create less carbon. So this is the exciting opportunity that Craig and I have found. So what we do with our $1 million every year is find 10 organizations and invest $100,000 in each of those organizations to help farmers in the developing world live their lives and do their work while contributing less to climate change. It's very important. Our parameters are very strict. We're not trying to help people that are suffering because of climate change. That's a fine thing to do, but that's not our mission. We want to help farmers do their work in a way that contributes less to climate change. That's our Rick Steves Climate Smart initiative, okay? And that's what Craig's going to be talking about in a moment. So, we're privileged people. We live in the richest country on the planet. We work hard, and if you're in this travel show, you like to travel, right? So we got the money, we got the opportunity, we want to travel. We want to enjoy the world. That's a beautiful thing if we do it in a thoughtful way. You can conceivably travel in a way where you learn nothing, and you come home and you're just a bigger part of the problem. Or you can travel in a way where you have plenty of fun, but you come home with the empathy for the other 96% of humanity and an understanding of the challenges environmentally and from a justice and peace and economic point of view. That's what's exciting to me. And that's why I write a book called Travel as a Political Act. And when I go around the country giving talks, I'm not teaching people how to pack light and catch the train. I'm teaching people how to travel in a way that broadens their perspective. So they bring home the most beautiful souvenir, and that's an empathy for those other 96% of people on this planet. I love traveling that way. This is what turns me on. I just cannot get over how exciting this world is. It's filled with beautiful people. It's filled with love. It's filled with families just like ours. And you wouldn't know it if you didn't get out there, because they're sure not going to tell you about it here. It is really important for us to realize that going forward after this pandemic, the challenges that are going to be confronting us are going to be new challenges. They're going to be blind to walls, impervious to conventional weaponry. They're going to be challenges that require nations working together, I believe, good governance, an embrace of science, and an honest approach to things where you can't win here and lose there, because the wind will just blow it over again. You got to win here and win there with good policies. That's the challenges, I think, of the future. And when we travel and come home, we learn about that and we get more tuned into it. A beautiful thing about travel is we meet people who are supposed to be our enemies. If my government says I can't go somewhere, that's the first place I want to go. Cuba, Iran, lots of places where you go, you went there? Yeah, and I had the best trip of my life. I like to travel to places that we are needing more understanding. I love to travel in a way where we connect with real people, and it makes it tougher for their propaganda to demonize us. And then when we come home, it makes it tougher for our propaganda to demonize them. That makes the world a better place. And that's to me, that's the justification of traveling, even if it comes with environmental consequences. So what we're going to talk about is minimizing those environmental consequences. Another great thing about travel is you understand that there are walls, physical walls and metaphorical walls on this planet, and you don't know the story unless you talk to people on both sides of the wall. If you've only talked to Catholics in Ireland, you don't know what that wall means. You got to talk to Protestants too. If you've only talked to Israelis and Jewish people in the Holy Land, you don't know what that wall is. That's what you're seeing right here. You got to talk to people on the other side of that wall too. For me as a traveler, that's the joy of travel, is to talk to people on both sides of the wall. Again, metaphorical walls and physical walls. I love this shot of this little girl here because all of us can envision a little girl we know on an overstuffed chair, sleeping. You know, the adults are talking in the other room, and she just kind of cuddles up there and goes to bed. And she could be in Colombia, she could be in Mexico, she could be in Hawaii, she could be in Canada, she could be in Iran. She's in Iran, actually, but she could be anywhere. And to me, the beautiful thing is everybody enjoys their ice cream cone. You know, when we travel, we have so much in common. So we asked our travelers, what are the issues that are ethical that we should be mindful of if we want to be ethical travelers? And other than climate change, which we'll get to in a minute. And a lot of people said crowds. Crowds can really hurt a community. And by our nature, we all go to the same places. It's like, we're looking for herd immunity. We've already got herd mentality, all right? Why do we go to the same places? I don't know, but it's this Instagram thing, you know? Everybody is taking a selfie on the same spot. It's crazy when you go to Europe. Why is everybody there and not there? That's the Instagram spot, you see? So you take that on a broader context, and everybody goes to the same few sites, and everybody goes to the same few cities. And as more and more of us travel, there's more and more of this downside of that, where different communities suddenly become tourist attractions more than communities where people live. It's an ethical issue. Think about a cruise ship. There's 3,000 tourists on a cruise ship. And in Alaska, each one of those communities where the cruise ship stops had to make a choice. Do we sell our soul to the cruise ship? Or do we not make it friendly for the cruise ship and then have none of that business? And there's not a right or a wrong answer. It's a very difficult ethical issue. Because when the cruise ship stops there, they own you. They get a cut of everything in that community, and some communities would rather not have that wealth and have the independence. There's an issue. There's an environmental issue about cruising. There's a lot of concern about, when I spend money, does that money stay in that community, or is it just with some international corporation that takes the money back to the wealthier world? That's an important issue to me. I like to spend money on the road, and I like that money to stay in the community. That's one reason I'm not big on staying in international chain hotels, even if I've got miles to let me have a room there. I mean, it's very interesting how we get roped into all of that stuff, and that's a whole nother ethical issue. But what I like is family-run hotels. They don't need to be little hovels or little simple guest houses. Here's a very nice hotel run by the Koch family in a little town in Austria. I know that money stays with them. I know that hotel's been in the family for generations. To me, it feels good to spend money there. Another issue is Airbnb. Short-term rentals in a more generic sense. I love the efficiency of Airbnb. It's amazing. It's like, take that, hotels. Here I can have a bigger room and more comfort right downtown for half the price. But there is a downside to Airbnbs, and that is that it drives the rent up, and landlords just want to maximize. And if they can earn more in 5 days renting to you and me than a whole month maintaining an apartment for a senior there that's been there all their life, that senior or that person on a fixed budget, local stale, gets pushed into the concrete suburbs, and what was a charming, vibrant local community becomes a short-term rental community, and it guts the whole personality and character and soul of that town. Is that an issue? Ethical? Yeah. Is it one I'm going to go to the mat for? I got other issues. But I am aware of that when I travel, that Airbnb can mess things up. And Airbnb is just going to get, and other similar organizations and short-term rental outfits, it's just going to get more of an impact on communities. The Ramblas in Barcelona. Last time I updated my Spain book for the chapter on Barcelona for the Ramblas, I just said rest in peace. The Ramblas, if you've been there years ago, you know. You remember? There's, grandmas taking their kids out to buy little birds, and old-timers with their cigars reading the newspaper, and a market filled with locals buying their beans instead of tourists buying slushies and little gifty potpourri. Right now, the Ramblas has become a tourist gauntlet. And nobody lives around there anymore because all of the locals have been driven out, and now it's inhabited by tourists in for 3 days. No more community in that part of Barcelona. Why? Airbnb. You go to a small town on a beach or up in the mountains, and 20 years ago it was a vibrant community. Today, if their government doesn't prohibit short-term rentals, most of those cottages are occupied by the people who own them at Easter and Christmas, and the rest of the year rented out by Airbnb, and there's no more school. There's no more children in the town, and the town dies. And there's a family, and they've got kids, but what do? They no longer have the town that their grandparents grew up in. So that's an ethical issue about short-term rentals. Ever since I was a kid, I have been really into reality travel, educational travel. This is a photograph of a group I was with a long time ago in Nicaragua or El Salvador. You can see Archbishop Oscar Romero on the wall in the back there. And I love educational travel. I still work with this company. It's called the Center for Global Education and Experience at Augsburg College in St. Paul. But there are tour companies, not here probably, that do educational travel. And to people that want to have that kind of experience, to understand what is a banana republic, what is the power of international corporations and the dollar there, and how can that provide structural poverty that keeps local people down. I like to work hard and get wealthy, but I don't want to do it on the backs of desperate poor people who live in a world where there's a structural basis to their poverty, and that's something we can be mindful of in our travels. I really think it's important when we travel to realize that we like the efficiency of international chains, but what is it on the receiving end of globalization? In Central America, my friends say globalization's like a big train. You got to get on it or get run over. You can't wish it away. And I just did a show on hunger and hope, lessons learned in Ethiopia and Guatemala, and my premise was you can't argue with globalization. It's here. How can we help people get into that value chain and into that global economy? But can it be done in an ethical way? Or can it be done in a way where the dominant, powerful countries just keep the other countries down with hard-hitting trade policies designed to keep people without options? This is an ethical issue. It's beyond the attention span of most people, but it's an interesting thing if you want to get into it. and it doesn't necessarily make you happier. Thomas Jefferson said, travel makes a person wiser if less happy. It's interesting to think about. Mohammed said, don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you've traveled. I say the world's a beautiful place and it's exciting to go get to know it. And we can then understand that a friendly trade policy will let this girl and her family actually grow enough corn and diversify enough to sell the food in the market and give their kids the nutrition they need and prosper, instead of abandoning the farm to go to the big city or come to the United States, which makes the world a less stable place. It's very, very strange to me how we're so concerned about that wall, and we're not concerned very much at all about what causes people to want to go to that wall. We could afford to have better policies to keep people on the farm instead of desperate in the cities. But it just takes a little bit of ethics from the top down. But boy, the power of water is something else, and we can do that. So these are all issues that we can be dealing with. If you want to know more about that, I did produce a show just 2 or 3 years ago called Hunger and Hope, Lessons from Ethiopia and Guatemala. You can watch it anytime on my website, like all of my shows. In fact, there's a book I wrote that is available for free on a PDF right there in the TV section at ricksteves.com. If you want to learn, I'm just teasing you with a little bit of this stuff, but that is, for me, a beautiful souvenir, is to have an appetite for that, because you know how beautiful people are south of the border. I like to travel with the window down. I like to travel and talk to people. And I like to travel knowing that there are people with struggles that I'm not even aware of, and they'd give their life for these struggles, and I didn't even know these struggles existed. Think of the dislocation and the environmental catastrophe caused by wars on this planet. These are tragic. Not all of them can be avoided, but if you have an approach that sees wars as a situation where nobody wins, if we could just learn that, we would be a lot better off for it. Now, there's other issues, and everybody has their own issues that they would go to the mat for. Understandably, many people are very, very concerned about the rights of gay people. And you wouldn't want to go to a country that was homophobic and, treated, oppressed gay residents or travelers. Well, there are countries you can go that are gay-friendly, and there are countries you can go that are horrible places that way, and you might choose where you want to go based on that. Other people are interested in animal rights, and they may not want to go to this part of France because they force feed their geese, so they make delicious foie gras. Or you could say, I don't want to go there because they have a medieval, brutal ritual tradition called bullfighting, and it's just not fair for the bull. These are real issues. We don't need to all embrace them. There's not a right answer and a wrong answer. Somebody else's outrage doesn't make them correct. But as travelers, we need to make up our mind. We need to be honest about this. My philosophy as a travel writer is, if it's only kept alive by tourism and if I'm promoting it, that's not good. If it's going to be there with or without tourism, and I explain it on my standards, that's fine. Other people could differ. But, these are worth thinking about. And then in an age of pandemic, is it good to be traveling and spread all of these viruses? There's just lots of interesting issues that we're going to be struggling with. Climate change is here. Okay, that's the underlying challenge that we have, right? This is the existential problem for us today. It's the immediate problem. It's what Craig's going to be talking about in a few minutes. And, all my life, I've been looking at this in Europe, and I've been seeing that the fountains in major cities around Europe are now places of relief when there's a heat wave in the summer. I used to know that, I know that Celsius and Fahrenheit, I don't really understand it, but I do know 28 is 82. And I'm from Seattle. Anything over 28 is hot. And if it's in the 30s, I'm not a happy traveler. And routinely, I see entire countries deep into the 30s for weeks on end in Europe now. These heat waves in Europe, and my experience is Europe, so that's my what I'm talking about. It would be the same anywhere in the world. But I never had the problems we've had in the last decade with heat in the summer. I've missed flights in Frankfurt several times because of thunderstorms. They just closed the airport down with a thunderstorm. And they didn't used to have these monsoon storms in the afternoon. Now it's routine. Late in the afternoon, if I've got my pretzel and my sauerkraut and my beer, and we're enjoying the open-air beer garden, and then the clouds just let loose, and everybody grabs their pretzels and their beer, and they run for cover. I can't tell you how many times we've grabbed our pretzels and beer and run for cover when monsoon hits Germany. It didn't used to be that way. It's just the climate change. Much of Europe never needed air conditioning. Even today, you travel in countries and you go, where's the air conditioning in this place? Well, it's not Texas, it's Germany or Ireland or England, and they just didn't need air conditioning until recently. And now they're having to bite the bullet and get air conditioning, even if they wish they didn't have to embrace that reality. Governments all over Europe are paying for water so people stay hydrated. Big water dispensers in the middle of a town. I was just in Spain a couple months ago, and they've got canvas awnings over the street so people can be out in the middle of the day without, baking under the sun. I mean, it is, if you look at our tour sales, there's a big hump in the spring, very little in the middle of the summer, and a big hump in the fall. And that hump's getting more and more pronounced as it's hard to enjoy the Mediterranean in the heat of the summer. A lot of Italians are up in Sweden in July and August. You'd never seen so many Italians in Sweden until the last decade. All over Northern Europe, it seems that people have been eating out as part of their tradition, but they didn't used to. Now, you have to have for a restaurant to stay in business in Northern Europe, it has to have outdoor seating and indoor seating. I've noticed they just open one or the other depending on the weather. But that's new. That is new. I was on the top of a cathedral in Lyon in France, and there was tape on broken slate tiles. And they said with the last heat wave, the slate on their roof was cracking. It's been up there for centuries, and now it's cracking. And of course, you've heard of the shrinking glaciers. A big part of tourism in much of Europe is glaciers. Every time there's a glacier that I've been having in my books for 30 years, now the people who do those tours have to hike farther to get to the glacier, and they've become advocates for anti-climate change because their whole livelihood, their love of nature is in their face every day as this glacier recedes up the mountain. It's very striking. Any ski resort in Europe, it has to make snow. When you go hiking in the summer, you see, what are these pods with a green hood and a reservoir nearby? These are snowmaking plumbing, and you just can't have a ski resort in Europe without making your own snow now. That wasn't the case a generation ago, that's for sure. A lot of you know the Cinque Terre, and you know how much I love the Cinque Terre. This is my favorite town there, Vernazza. These towns long ago paved over their ravine so they can have a main drag. It's a beautiful main drag, but they didn't anticipate violent weather. You don't get more rain with climate change, you get it all coming at the same time. You get 4 months of rain in 2 hours. And if you've got a nice valley around, that valley is a funnel, and it shoves 4 months of rain into that town. And in this beautiful town, look at how beautiful that is. The next day, it's under 6 feet of mud. That little town was uninhabitable for 6 months. They questioned whether they should even re-inhabit it. Thankfully, they worked on it. They all came together. But this is, anytime somebody says that's a 1 in 500 year storm, that's a storm of the century, they're looking backwards. Those are not 1 in 500 year storms anymore. Every couple of years, you're going to have that 1 in 500 year storms. That's what climate change is, and we've got to notice it and wake up. In Venice, this is the most beautiful square, and it's the lowest square in town. And every couple of generations, they try to put a little more sand under those stones there, and it's sinking. And now they have quite routine floods on St. Mark's Square. Hamburg, beautiful city in the north of Germany. It's got miles of riverbank, and the riverbank, they've just built a big levee and landscaped it, so it's like a park. It's a beautiful thing, but it's many feet higher than before because they don't want to be ravished by floods. This could be Havana. This could be any sort of town on the water. Havana's got a beautiful promenade like this. It happens to be Alexandria in Egypt. Beautiful town. On my way out of Alexandria, I just saw this horrible sight right here. This is taking a beautiful shoreline, and because of rising tide, having to barricade it. And in the future, think of all the beautiful, elegant, historic harbor fronts that are going to have either the pretty version, if they're a rich country like Germany with Hamburg there, or just a desperate pile of concrete to protect those towns from floods. All over southern England now, there are towns that never had floodgates that now have floodgates. That's climate change. The Dutch are notorious for being frugal. They don't just throw away billions of dollars. They're spending billions and billions of euros moving sand, bolstering their dikes, preparing for a rising sea level. You see this initiative the Dutch are taking on because half of their country is below sea level. Huge investment, controlling the storm surge barriers. This is a storm surge barrier. Imagine 2 Eiffel Towers on their sides on wheels that can roll in to protect 1 million people from a high tide with a wind and a storm. Like what devastated New York or what devastated New Orleans, that would devastate Rotterdam, except that they've invested in this storm surge barrier and they won't have it. These are things we're going to be doing routinely in the future because we don't have the political will to deal with fossil fuels. We can't afford to deal with fossil fuels, so we can afford to do all this other heroic stuff, which is infinitely more expensive than fossil fuels. And when you tour that stuff, you can't help but think about it. So in Europe, they're starting to take serious ethical decisions on how they're going to live and how we're going to travel. There's a huge pressure to go by train now instead of driving and flying. Makes a lot of sense. Europe has invested in their trains with climate change in mind, and it makes it, because people are pretty selfish and practical in their decision making, and they just want to get there economically and quickly. Well, are you going to fly or are you going to take the train? If you have a European train, you're more likely to take the train because you're going to go there quicker and also more green than by flying. They got wonderful bullet trains all over Europe. Public transportation is so good in Europe that many of my European friends never learned to drive. It just doesn't occur to them. Why would you learn how to drive? We've got this great public transportation. And to travel in Europe, I make a point of visiting these community centers that are sort of celebrating how this city is being renovated to be green and environmentally friendly in the future. And that includes a lot of two-wheeled transportation. It's exciting to go to Europe and do this in mind with your sightseeing. In the Netherlands, of course, they're great on biking, but all over Europe now. Drivers are frustrated, and pedestrians and bikers and people taking public transit are feeling really good about what the government is doing, and we're working on that here in the United States also. I was just in Amsterdam, and this used to be a very busy, 3-lane road here in the middle of town, and today it's like a grassy park with a couple of trolley lines, a beautiful bike path, and a pedestrian path, and you can hear the birds. It's so exciting what they're doing, and they told me in just a couple of years there'll be no more fossil fuel-driven vehicles on the canals or on the streets of Amsterdam. Of course, the Dutch are long-time advocates of wind power, and today entire communities are harnessing wind. So there's exciting stuff going on, and this is something that, as travelers, it's fun, it's interesting, it's inspiring to get to know. It makes our travels smarter. We want to go back in our travels. We don't want to be flight shamed out of our travels. We want to keep on traveling. That's what we're all about at my company at Rick Steves Europe. And that's why I'm very, very proud of our self-imposed carbon tax. This carbon tax is, I'm going to turn it over now to Craig. And I do want to remind you that we have a version of this talk that Craig and I did a few weeks ago. And if you've got friends that would like to get this information and think about this, you can go to ricksteves.com and go to the Monday Night Travel section, and you've got an archive of 100 shows, and the one about 3 weeks ago was the Climate Smart talk that we're going to give now. A little bit different, but it would be helpful for you if you want to hear this again. But I know Craig feels just like I do when it comes to taking care of our future. Craig came to my company about 10 years ago. He runs the company essentially because I'm usually on the road, and I'm so thankful that Craig Davidson has an ethic of good business is good business. And with Craig's vision and Craig's hard work, we have put this climate smart commitment together. Now it is up and running, and Craig's going to explain to you how that works and what a difference these modest investments in these companies in the developing world are doing to help those farmers do their work more efficiently and while contributing less to climate change. So I'm going to turn it over to Craig Davidson right now. Craig.
Travel, we believe it's the key to life. And so for us, we also believe that travelers have to bring that heightened perspective and that broadened perspective back home to their communities, because that allows you to make your community stronger, right? New ideas broaden your community, make your community stronger. And for us, that's called global citizenship. It's understanding you are one person on a planet of billions, and everyone has a unique perspective. And we also believe that travelers need to give back, or global citizens give back. And we call it treating the community like a shareholder. Rick talked a little bit about economics and the way accounting works. We don't look at things in terms of short-term return at Rick Steves Europe. We talk about long-term investment, and we see our community as a shareholder. We want to give back to it because the reason we're so successful is the travel community and the community of Edmonds where we work. And so that idea really ties all of us together at Rick Steves Europe and binds us together. We like to call ourselves this merry band of travelers. We joined Rick because we believe in what Rick stands for. I think all of you travel with us and know Rick because you believe in what he stands for, and so do we. And so I put some stuff on this slide, but Rick showed a picture of some guides and then our staff at a 4th of July parade during COVID. That's our staff in the square box at the bottom. And really, they handle all of our philanthropic work at Rick Steves Europe. So they are the ones who decide what we fund. They decide where our programs go, because we want our programs to represent the community. And of course, our staff comes from our community. The top picture is really a newspaper article that I copied, but I think many of you know, but during COVID, when none of us could travel, we actually kept everyone on our payroll, and they volunteered in our community at nonprofits to make sure that those, because nonprofits were really hit during COVID, and we wanted to make sure that our community stayed strong with that delivery of service. And the other picture is Rick and I standing in front of our Edmonds Senior Center. It was the Edmonds Senior Center, it's now the Edmonds Community Center, and we were a major funder of that, so that's what's being constructed. We're also major funders of the Linwood Community Center, which is about to break ground, because we truly believe in this idea of building places that people can come together and share ideas and really make that community stronger. And so as global citizens and travelers, we do know that every trip impacts the environment. Like, we're not going to sit here and tell you that it doesn't, but we also don't think we should be shamed into not traveling. Right? The idea of this is saying, what are your values? What are the issues? And really, how do I become personally accountable for the travel that I do? And being personally accountable is important, because when we talk about this in general, governments don't require your accountability, companies aren't taking it, and really accounting standards boards aren't telling us how to account for it. So we wanted to do it ourselves. And that's what we call as our climate smart commitment. It's a self-imposed carbon tax, where we pay $30 a traveler to fund nonprofits around the world who are doing active work to combat climate change. And there's an asterisk here in 2019 because we generally donate $1 million a year. It's $30 times 30,000 people. But when COVID hit in 2020 and 2021, we obviously couldn't travel. But because of the work that these organizations have been doing is so important to us, we still donated $500,000 each year during COVID to make sure those programs continued. And so when we talk about programs, just to be clear on this, these aren't all of our organizations. Organizations that we've donated money to more than once. We call them our core portfolio, and they are working throughout the world. And so we'll talk a little bit about them today, but we have donated over $3 million as of today. Our new portfolio has just been announced, and it's live on our website, and so you can see who our new partners are for this year.